You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm, and today we're going to be talking about One Deck Dungeon. Today we're going to be talking about both One Deck Dungeon and One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows. Sort of format of the episode, or the way we prepared for it anyway, is Scruffy had already played One Deck Dungeon prior to us doing it for the show. So I've been playing One Deck Dungeon, and Scruffy's kept the copy of Forest of Shadows. And I've been playing through one, he's been playing through the other. We're going to be talking about both, and I'm going to be learning all about Forest of Shadows at the same time you guys are, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and a massive thank you to Banana Republic, who provided us both with the two copies that we've played. They are one of our
listeners, Discord users, patrons, friends, lovely person.
Long-term, awesome supporters of the show. And yeah, can't thank you enough, Banana. This has been a real treat for both of us, and I'm looking forward to unpacking it in the episode.
Okay, so before we dive in, should we tell everyone a little bit about what One Deck Dungeon is all about?
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't seen the game before, One Deck Dungeon is a soloable dungeon dive where you take on the role of an adventurer seeking to descend the depths and eventually fight a boss. At the start of the game, you choose your hero, each offering different skills, heroic feats, and stats, and you choose a dungeon with different difficulty levels. There is one deck of dungeon cards which makes up every enemy and trap you will meet in the game, and a bunch of d6 dice in different colours to represent the 3 stats, and 1 wild colour. Every turn you will discard 2 cards from the dungeon deck before taking an action. Once the deck is depleted, you will descend to the next level of the dungeon, shuffling the discard pile to make a new dungeon deck. You also slide the level card up to increase the passive difficulty of every encounter. On your turn, you will either be exploring or entering a room. Exploring sees you place cards from the dungeon deck face down on the table, so there are 4 cards in total in front of you. Entering a room allows you to take any card in front of you and encounter it. Once revealed, you can choose to either flee from the encounter, usually if you flipped something horrible, returning it back to the table face up, or you can deal with the encounter. Encounters always resolve the same way, with you activating any heroic feats on your hero card, then rolling dice equal to your hero's relevant stats, and finally placing them in an attempt to cover up the encountered enemy or trap cards' boxes, as well as the boxes on the level card. Any boxes left uncovered after all your dice are placed will deal the depicted consequences to your hero, usually in the form of wounds or time loss, or poison in the Forest of Shadow expansion. Time loss simply means discarding more cards from the dungeon deck, forcing you through the game faster, and meaning you will get to the end boss with less time to prepare, while wounds can lead to a loss if they exceed your hero's health. After completing an encounter, regardless of the consequences, you will always take its reward to either increase your stats, give you new skills to play with, or take you closer to leveling up. Once you have descended 3 levels of the dungeon, you will meet the boss for that dungeon and have a final showdown or fight to the death. And that is One Deck Dungeon in a nutshell.
That is One Deck Dungeon in a nutshell. Good job as always, Scruffy.
Thank you, Norm.
Can I start with just saying, this game is essentially kick the door down, beat up the bad guy, take the loot, rinse and repeat, right?
It certainly is, yeah.
That is, when I first got into the hobby, how someone pitched Munchkin to me. And made me play Munchkin. How I wish I played this game instead, because this is a really, really cool game.
I feel like there's something about this game that, yeah, I'm with you 100%. I wish it had been a game I'd encountered right at the start of my kind of board gaming experience, because it feels nostalgic, even though I only played it quite far into having played board games, not necessarily solo board games. I played the digital version of this quite a while ago, but it was at a point where I'd learned quite a few board games. And I just think it's so light and chill and so easily accessible that I think this is a game that is so new player friendly, right?
Yes, it is. But one thing I didn't expect is it's because I've heard that, I've heard it's a dice chucker, it's a game where with a lot of random elements. I didn't expect it to be so satisfying as well.
Mm.
I feel like you have a lot of choice and agency over what you do with your dice,
Hmm.
with very little rules overhead, and the balance it manages to strike is wonderful, and it's something I really hope we get to unpack throughout the episode.
Yeah, it's very puzzly, isn't it? Like, so you roll the dice for your combat or your trap card, whatever you're facing, and then you look at those numbers and you start trying to fill in these boxes in front of you, and you're trying to cover all the boxes, but you've rolled and you haven't got quite enough to do those boxes. So you look down at your character and you look at their skills and you try and work out how you can get the most value out of what you've just rolled. Well, if I place a two mana, two blue dice on this skill, that will mean I can roll a different blue dice and add two to it. So that's going to increase a blue dice for me. Okay, I'll do that first, and then I'll see where I am. And it's that sort of thing. But you just kind of each encounter it's kind of a conversation almost between you, your dice, your skills, and trying to get those boxes filled in.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I rolled something in the game and I thought, because as well as it giving you agency, it also gives you restrictions, which is what adds to the puzzly element. And one of the restrictions I really, really like, because it's so frustrating, is the boxes with the shield on them.
Right.
The shield boxes always need to be filled in first. And I can't tell you how many times I've rolled my dice. I've gone, oh well, I need a 6 yellow for the shield. And I haven't got any. Well, that's the one I need to fill in first, so I'm doomed. Hold on a second. Let me just hold on. If I use this skill and then discard these 2 dice to turn it into a black, then I can actually, and then that creates a future problem for future you, and you have to work that one out as well. And eventually, you go, hold on, I can do this whole thing. I only take 1 wound. Oh, but I got a purple die left over, and that means I can spend it on this skill to negate that wound. Oh, brilliant! How
Yeah.
did I do that? I thought it was game over a second ago. you
Yeah,
know?
when you roll the dice and you look at them and they're not telling you they don't immediately give you the answer. They don't, I mean, unless you're very lucky, they don't immediately say, "Yep, just put us all on the thing, match the numbers." You're often sat there with not quite a perfect situation. You know, you haven't got enough whatever yellow dice, or you haven't got the right numbers on the yellow dice. So you are then forced to get creative and start manipulating, start making sacrifices here and there. Well, maybe if I take that pink 6 that would cover that 2 time loss, I can turn it into the yellow I need to stop me taking wounds, for example. And that sort of prioritization that is coming from you, the player, is really kind of fun and it makes you feel quite clever, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's worth probably unpacking how the game gives you agency because,
Mm.
as you said in your description, you roll a dice and then you choose how to allocate them. So, what levers does the game give you to control the dice after you've rolled them? I think that's really where the game shines for me.
Yeah.
So, I want to unpack a few of those, and I'd like for you to add in any that I will inevitably forget, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay.
So, one that I thought was really, really smart is there's this wild dice. The black dice are wild; they could be any color.
They're called the hero dice, right?
Yes. Now, with these hero dice, you might not have any when you rolled them, but you can acquire them with the dice you already have. What you do is you take 2 dice of any color and you can just discard them. And whatever the lowest value was on one of those 2 dice, you will get that back in a black die. Meaning, if you haven't got the color you need to fill in what you have, you can. It's obviously poor value, but sometimes it's just what you need. And I think that is so smart because it will inevitably make the rest of the card harder for you because you're working with less dice. But it will fill in the restrictive elements, the requirements, the shield icons for you, or it will give you the last box that you need. So I like the way it solves one problem and yet creates another, whilst giving you agency over how you want to solve that. And it's such a simple rule that's such a simple rule to understand. Take 2 dice, remove them, and get the lowest value back as a black die. But the gameplay implications there are they're not, I don't want to over exaggerate, they're not huge, it's not groundbreaking, but it's really, really fun.
Yeah, it is really fun and it makes matches really exciting as well. And I think that's really important when you think about a game that is at its core a dice chucker game where you roll loads of dice, how you feel when you see those dice should match the mechanical value that those dice give you. And a lot of people would, I think, be put off in One Deck Dungeon by the randomness. That success or failure can be dependent on the dice rolls. But certainly, when you look at things like this mechanic, where if you see matching numbers in the dice, there's something, even Monopoly gets this, that there's something important there to you as a player, I think. I think we just have an innate want for that pattern recognition. And when you see that and you go, oh, we've got 2 3s, I could turn those into a wild 3. That just seems so sensible with those heroic dice. I called them hero dice. I've just realized they're heroic dice. And so those heroic dice, I think, really fit that kind of, I don't know what the word for it is, but that sort of, I want to call it satisfying wish fulfillment. I can't think of the right word to say here.
I can't either,
That
Scruffy.
you see something and it immediately leaps out at you. And I think it's really important game design to factor that in when you're working stuff out.
Especially when you're working with dice.
Yes.
Because that's the fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And here we have, it's worth saying right off the bat here, we have a game that has lots of dice, and you roll those dice and you roll them lots and you re-roll them. And, there's something really gratifying about that from, having, I'm sure all of us and a lot of you listening would have played so many, deep and stodgy, thinky games where you're not allowed to roll the dice.
Mm.
How
Yes.
fun is it? How refreshing is it to just pick up this little box of fun and start rolling those dice?
A little box of fun, put that on the box.
And the great thing as well is you unlock more dice as you play. So the handfuls get bigger until you're finally fighting the end boss and you are just picking up. And I've been smiling to myself while I've been playing it, just rattling a massive handful of dice and throwing them down. It feels impactful. It feels powerful. And it starts to get more kind of, you start to understand and intuit a bit more what's going to come up, what you're going to do with all those low dice, which skills you take them to, which skills you activate first, because that gives you the best information. It's wicked.
So that's where I was hoping to go next. So after the heroic dice, the next way in which this game gives you agency is with the skills, I think. And I'm talking about agency post-roll, because I think that's what's important, right?
Yeah.
That's where this game sings.
Yeah, there's basically no agency pre-roll. You have 4 face-down cards in front of you usually, or something like that, and you just pick a card to encounter. It's not like you have an idea of what that card might be. You can't peek at them. You might have an encounter that you ran away from earlier, so you can either face that now if you think you're ready, or take a mystery card. But that's about the agency you get in pre-roll, isn't it?
Yeah, so the agency you have post-roll is the next way in which it enables you to make decisions is the skills. So one of the things you can choose to do when you kill an enemy or defeat an encounter, so whether that be a trap or an enemy, is they will have rewards on them. The rewards will either be an item, a skill, or a potion, or you can just take them for XP. Now, the skills go underneath your character card, and they're like extra ways to spend the dice that you roll. You can, like, say, for example, sacrifice a yellow, and that means you get to roll 2 more purples. So that means sacrificing one of your fighting dice to get to roll 2 agility dice, for example. And by the time you get to the end, knowing what order to play them in, especially in the boss fights and the later dungeon scenarios, is so important and so much fun. And the fun before that, before you have all of those options to you, is knowing which ones to pick. Because there's something lovely about going, well, I'm playing the warrior, so I have lots of yellow fighty dice. I'm going to take this early skill that lets me spend one of them to get 3 mana rolls or an automatic success on agility, because I don't have that skill. I'm not as good with that kind of thing at the moment. It's really fun to build your character, and it's elegant in its design as well, in that you kill the enemy, you slide it underneath, and then later on it's going to provide you extra agency in the game. I love that. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a wicked choice as well, isn't it? When you deal with an encounter card and you look at it and you can do one of 3 things with it. You can either slide it under as a skill or potion if it's a potion, slide it to the side as a stat, or slide it under the level up card for experience to try and level up. It's a nice little choice, and it's important to say that you have a number of slots based on your level. So you only are allowed to have, like, I think it's 2 skills at the start and 1 item, which is the stats. And then as you level up, you get more slots, but you can replace one if you want to. So if you decide, actually I prefer this skill to this skill, that's fine. You slot the new skill under, replace the old one if you're full on slots, and put that old one as experience. So it gives you that freedom of choice and flexibility there. It allows you to build your character how you want to. It doesn't restrict you and say, no, 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 you took too many skills early, you can't replace them now. It accounts for that randomness of not encountering the skill you want early by allowing you to take a weaker skill or a skill you're not as interested in, but then replace it when you find a good one, which I think is really neat.
And then that one that you just replaced will give you XP and help you level up. There's no waste.
Yeah.
All the loot is valuable.
Yeah, and oh my god, there's so much more to unpack with this. Just the thing that springs immediately to mind is that an interesting factor about all this that you may not have noticed, if you haven't played, is that this is taking cards out of the deck. So these cards are going under your hero for their item, for their skill, or even as experience. Once you spend that experience, they go from the game. So they thin the deck down ever so slightly, meaning that each subsequent floor from the first gets a little bit quicker, a little bit less opportunity to encounter enemies and cards, and ramps up the speed at which you get to the final boss. So as your character levels up, you are removing time from the deck, which is, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about that is the way it helps sort of push the arc of the game to be in a satisfying direction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll be honest, the first time I played, once I got through the second floor and I got into the third and final, I thought, I didn't think the game was going to be this long. But
Yes,
then,
yeah.
10 minutes later, I was done.
Yeah, and it does feel like that because you're doing the same action of shuffling the deck. If you haven't played very much, it can feel like, and to some extent, the game might be a little bit longer than you expect it to be because it's such a small game, small box, little one deck. You expect it to be quite quick, and especially when you're learning the game, it can feel like it outstays its welcome a little bit. But as you get more and more experience, you start to realize, no, it's going to speed up a little bit. And once you get past that second floor, there's not long left now. You will be seeing that boss soon. And I think that sort of expectation changes the more you play.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what I found as well. And I was really grateful for that. I thought
Yeah.
it means that when you're at your weakest, you're given your most opportunity to level up and
Mm-hmm.
to grab items and potions and skills and XP.
And it also invites you to be a bit more frivolous with, oh, I'll take a time loss here. That's not a big deal. I'll lose 1 or 2 cards from the dungeon deck here or there. It's only the first level. We've got ages, which I think is nice. That it invites that sort of lazy play and then kind of punishes you for it subtly without you really expecting it to happen.
Yeah. That's interesting. Very Robinson Crusoe. The way you go. Well, we can put that in the adventure deck. That's not going to come back and bite us.
Yeah,
Then
good
it
point.
does.
I mean, it's true even of wounds. Like, wounds are nothing. They don't matter. You'll heal them at some point, sure, probably down the line, until you realize that actually there are no opportunities to heal now, and I'm right at the end with 3 wounds on my character. How did this happen? I was expecting to heal those.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed that as well. I got to the final boss fight, and I thought I've only taken 3 damage. Let's look at this boss then. Oh, if I leave one of their boxes open, it does 4 damage. That's me dead.
Yeah, but this is part of the joy of it, I think, and it's really important that it's like this because when you inevitably have an encounter that you can't cover all the box off because you rolled absolute garbage that turn, then you need to be okay with taking those wounds and not feel like throwing your toys out of the pram and restarting, right? You need to be able to. I think it's important that you don't know whether you're going to end up with those wounds when you encounter the boss, that you don't know how long they'll linger because you might heal them with a potion at some point. They might not be a big issue for now. You don't know what's going to come, what's going to happen, right? And I think it's important that that mystery is there.
Yeah, for sure. I agree entirely. I like the level of uncertainty that isn't just turn by turn, but over the whole over the whole course of the game. I think
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of compounded and made even more clear with the way that time loss happens. Because I tend to find that those are the boxes that get left. You know, an odd time loss here, a couple of time loss there. That's fine. I'll just leave those ones open. I filled in most of the boxes, and you know, I might as well do that rather than take a wound. But so these kind of minor consequences, I think it's really cool the way they kind of don't feel bad. They feel fine. They feel relaxing to encounter as a player, I think. Like, well, at least it's just a time loss, not a wound. That's okay. Oh, it was just one wound. It could have been worse. I could have had a wound and a poison counter if you're playing Forest of the Shadows. I managed to avoid that by covering that box cleverly. So even when you don't quite succeed as well as you could or have a flawless success, you still feel good about it because it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
And I think that's a really interesting piece of design that we sort of almost overlooked entirely there when we were describing the game. I think the fundamental idea of whenever you're done, you'll always get the loot. You'll always win the encounter.
Yeah.
Unless you die, you will always win the encounter.
Yeah, for sure.
And you think, oh, well, where's the tension? Well, the tension is how well do you win it? Because sometimes, you know, you're left with like 3 boxes of consequences to deal with, and you think, this isn't a win.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I'm glad I've got the 4 XP and that's going to level me up. But you know what? I could have really just done with rolling a lot better that time.
But you don't feel bad. And I think this is what I think the heart of this game for me is. It is a masterclass in how to make players not feel bad about losing. And we'll get onto this even more in a minute. But you're absolutely right there that moment where you have a horrible roll or you have an encounter that just goes terribly and you have that thought of, if only I'd rolled better, I wish I'd just rolled better. You don't feel responsible for the loss there. You feel like you did everything you could to mitigate it as much as you could with that roll. And, you know, even if you're wrong, you don't know you're wrong because you didn't notice.
That's true. That's true. You know, you think I've looked at all the options and I've done this the best way possible. But that may or may not be true, but there's no way of knowing that because the only person there to assess how well you're doing is yourself.
Yeah, and you've got a really great scapegoat. You can blame the dice. Well, I rolled 2 ones, so there was no way I was ever going to be able to do this. And that might be true. It might have been impossible. You know, when you encounter a card or an enemy, when you roll, it might be that your roll means you can't cover the boxes. You might not be able to cover, you know, I mean, you'll probably be able to cover some boxes statistically, like unless you rolled literally all ones. But yeah, that could happen. But it could be that it was impossible to do better than you did, even though you're taking this massive hit. So as a player, you don't feel bad.
And on top of that, once you've processed all those feelings, you then, you know, you do get the 4 XP and you do level up. And that does give you an extra heroic die and a new potion that you can use on your now plethora of potion options that you've gained throughout your previous encounters. And that means you're going to breeze past the next one, and that's fine. So those sort of, you know, like you said, Scruffy, you do have a scapegoat in the dice and you don't feel bad about it because you feel like you've done the best you can. That's because you have those lovely options of agency post-roll that I was talking about. And on top of that, you're then rewarded, no matter how badly you've done.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the luck mitigation and the way the potions work a little bit more in a moment. But this works on a meta level too. That thing you're saying about getting the rewards for even if you fail, even if it doesn't work out. If you're playing the campaign mode, this happens on the grand scale of the game as well. So I'd love to just turn our attention to how the campaign works now.
I'm really excited to talk about this because when you said that it was a campaign mode, I kind of rolled my eyes a bit because every game has a campaign mode now. Like, it's the trendy thing, you know? Having a campaign mode is like having a blonde mohawk in the UK when David Beckham was at his prime. That's how trendy campaign modes are at the moment. And I kind of roll my eyes like, why is there a campaign mode? It's just a little small card game. It doesn't need one. But it doesn't work like a normal campaign. You don't have to play it through. There isn't an overarching story. What there is instead is this lovely score sheet where
Mm.
you just tick a box for every floor you've completed, every time you've leveled up, and 3 boxes for if you defeat the boss. And you can fill in green ones if you've done an easy boss, yellow ones if you've done a medium boss, or red ones if you've done a difficult boss. And once you complete a whole row, you get a new ability, which means your character gets to start the next game a little bit better. So there's some really fun options there of, do I just go for the harder one? Or do I sort of farm the easy one? Do I grind for a bit and get my character ready? Because I failed my first one. I got to the boss fight. I got to boss down to 1 health remaining, and I rolled terrible. And I took my last 2 wounds. I took 4 hits. I could only negate 2 of them with my skills, and I died. And I thought, I'm not moving on to the next one yet. I ticked up all my boxes. I got the veteran ability, which meant I started the game with a new skill. And I went again. Actually died quicker the next time, but neither here nor there.
Yes, but this is the thing. So this is basically, instead of a campaign mode, I think of it as a score sheet that gives you stuff. You know, depending on how well you do, you get more stuff. But if you were to lose really early on, as I did in one of my games, it doesn't feel bad because the time investment that you put into it, you get rewarded appropriately for that time investment. I did 2 floors, that's 2 ticks. I leveled up twice, that's 2 more ticks, that's 4 ticks. If you do the whole thing, you can get up to 9 ticks. Whoa! And you feel like you earned those 9 ticks, especially to defeat the boss being worth that big spike of free ticks. It feels like you earned it. But what I'm getting at here is that the reward happens even if you lose. It's just proportional to how well you did and how much time you invested. And that feels so right. That feels so good. How often is it that in board games, even our favorite board games like Mage Knight, for example, you get to the end and it's just a binary win-loss condition. You did it or you didn't do it. Either way, you still spent the same amount of time playing the game. So it kind of feels worse to have lost because you still spent all that time playing the game. You don't get knocked out any earlier.
Or even worse, in Too Many Bones, when you lose, you actually spend longer playing the game.
Oh my god, yeah, great example. Yeah, because you don't challenge the tyrant, do you?
And you don't get this isn't a Too Many Bones episode, but you don't get the progress, so you have to play longer to get more progress.
Yes. The game that it made me think this stood out most for is Gloomhaven. So in Gloomhaven, you can get to the last room, the last single enemy left, and lose, and then you get nothing for it. You just have to try it again. You might get some experience for your character or some cash, but not very much. And certainly comparatively to completing it and being able to then move on and progress the story, you don't get the reward that you were seeking from the game. When you play this, if you're interested in the reward from the game, you will get the reward you're seeking, just not as much of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the difference there is that because Gloomhaven, like you said, you will still get loot, you will still get XP. The difference there is that's not really what you're playing Gloomhaven for. You're playing Gloomhaven to progress the story and to explore the world. So when you get stuck, regardless of the loot you get, it feels bad. This game knows what you want from it. This game knows you want those ticks, so you can come and play again and be better. And it gives you them regardless of what you do, and it gives you them proportionately as well.
Yeah,
it doesn't get in its own way at all. It knows what parts of the game are fun, and it allows you to access them constantly. And I think that's so easy to, because games need to be challenging, they need to have wrinkles in them. And a lot of wrinkles that designers add in sometimes can actually prevent you from accessing the fun part of the game. You know, Mr. Turn is a really good example. There's nothing even close to that in One Deck Dungeon. It's all action all the time. You're the star, and you're going to have a good time.
Yeah. And even if you lose or get knocked back, get defeated, even if you lose the whole game, there's still something for you there. Like, even if you weren't playing with this score sheet, you know, the story that you get from the game is still interesting and it's still fun. It's still a fun experience to have, even if you get wiped out early. And you know what? Losing makes you just want to do it even more. Like, try that boss again. I find, anyway.
Yeah, I strongly agree. I don't know why anyone wouldn't play with a score sheet. It's such
Mm.
an easy thing to keep track of.
Yeah, it really is simple, isn't it?
It's so simple. You just finish your game and you, how well did I do? Tick tick tick, and it's not like counting points. It's just I did 3 level ups and 3 floors, 6 ticks, done.
Yep. And I do like that defeating the boss in itself is 3 ticks. It does give a sense of stakes to the thing, and it does make it really exciting if you do get to the boss fight. Because I mean, it is a challenge to get to the boss fight in a lot of them, especially if you're trying to punch above your weight and do a difficult dungeon or not grind a dungeon as you were saying earlier. It's not something I've done. I've always been trying to strive for the next big dungeon, play at a level that I find difficult. So it is exciting when you get to the boss fight, but it's even more exciting because that's 3 ticks right there. It kind of hooks you. But those 3 ticks, it's not that long an investment of time. It's not like doing 3 whole steps of the dungeon. You're fighting one encounter, maybe 2-3 turns on it max, right? And then that fight is over. It's not an entire cycle of the deck 3 times for those 3 ticks. So what that means is, win or lose, you've invested the same amount of time.
So can we talk about how the boss fights work? Because I think they're quite
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. The way the boss fights work, it is very much you are locked in to a combat encounter. And there are 2 types of encounters in the game: traps and combat. This is just one big combat encounter where every turn you roll all your dice and then you start assigning them to the boxes. And every boss has a different ability and they're all unique in their own special way. But usually, what you're trying to do is cover up the nasty boxes that are going to do damage to you, as well as the skull icons on the boxes. And for every one of those that you cover up, you will do 1 damage to the boss. And you have to try and take out their hit points, which is obviously very different to the other encounters in the game, where you will win regardless of how many boxes you cover up. With the boss fights, you have to cover up boxes to hurt them.
What's interesting is the game knows you want to cover those skull boxes because that's how you defeat the boss. But the game will give you really difficult choices to make about how to spend your dice because the other boxes that won't do damage to the boss, they will be the ones that hurt you the most. You know, you think, okay, most characters have around sort of 6 health, 5 health, 6 health, something like that. And there are boxes that will just straight up do 4 damage if you don't fill them in. And that you will have to chuck a lot of dice in those boxes in order to fill them in. So you think to yourself, right, all I got to do is, 5 damage to the boss, easy peasy, 6 damage to the boss, whatever, I can do that. And then you roll and think, if I don't put all my dice into that horrible sinkhole of dice, I'm going to get 4 damage. And that means I've got like maybe 1 more turn left to do it. And you've got a real choice to make of, especially if you have the luxury of, well, if 4 dice won't kill you, which is I found unusual, if you get to the boss fight and 4 hits won't kill you. But it has happened where I've got to the boss fight and I can take 4 damage. I can take it. What a luxury that is. But now I'm walking a very, very thin tightrope because now I absolutely cannot take any more damage. And I think the way the game makes you make those difficult decisions, and again, in what is essentially just rolling dice and placing them on a card, it's really fun.
Yeah, and it's very cinematic as well, isn't it? That you have this real locked in fight. And usually, I can't remember how they are for the base game, but certainly for the Forest of the Shadows, all the bosses have an enrage timer, which is to say, every turn they will do something that's going to make it so that if you just keep filling in all their damage boxes and not hurting them back, things are going to get worse. The game's going to end in a loss for some reason, for one reason or another. So, for example, there's one that the first one in this Forest of the Shadows that exiles dice at the start of every turn. It will just remove dice from the game, from your general supply, which means that those are no longer available to you. And if it starts getting to the point where your bank of dice is gone, you start not being able to roll all your dice on your stats, and you're going to lose. Eventually, you'll run out of dice to roll against it, and it's going to eat you. Right? I think that's the case for most, if not all, the bosses in the game. Is that true for the base game as well?
I don't think so.
Is it not? Maybe that's an addition to the Forest of Shadows. I think the Phoenix boss didn't have that as well. But certainly, I just fought a Scorpion today that had it exiled poison counters. I think that's a lovely design when they do include that in the bosses.
And yeah, they have all the effects are pretty devastating though. You know, there's the Yeti in the base game, for example, and they have a really basic effect of all ones you roll are discarded. Well, the first time I encountered this, I looked at the Yeti and I thought, well, ones won't fill in anything for the Yeti, so that doesn't matter. But then when you discard 4 of your dice, you realize I need those dice to activate my skills. I'm relying on those bad rolls so that I can unlock my skills to get more dice or to fill in more things or get some more automatic successes. I wanted those ones. I wanted, 4 ones so I could activate all 4 of my skills. That's so frustrating. I love how they're deceptively punishing.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's almost an enraged timer on that one, where at some point, if you keep just treading water with that boss, you're going to roll a load of ones, and you will lose all your dice, and it will hit you. Whatever those skills you've been relying on, yeah, it's going to hit you. So I see that as a
It's
similar.
exactly what happened in several of my plays. In several of my plays, I've steadily ticked up the boss, and then on like the third roll, everything's just gone terribly, and I can't. There was one really, really good play, and it sticks out of memory. I was using a blue 6 every turn to activate a really powerful effect, which let me change the value of 5 different dice.
Wow.
And that was super powerful. It was a lot of XP that I could have cashed it in for, but I used it as a skill, and it was saving my behind in the boss fight. And then one turn I didn't roll a blue 6, and I went, well, I'm dead. And I was staring at my skills and my potions, which were all depleted, and just trying to figure out, is there nothing smart I can do? I've been playing so well all game. They've only got 1 hit point left. No, that's it. You didn't roll your 6. You should have had a backup plan.
And how did you feel after that?
I played again immediately after.
That's what I mean. The loss in this game feels good. It feels like it's baked into the design, right? This game is as fun to lose as it is to win, and that's incredible.
Yeah. It's just a lot of fun to play.
Yes. There's a few things we haven't really touched on yet. So I wanted to talk about the difference between traps and combat. And before that, maybe I think we should maybe talk about the different types of boxes in the game. That you have big boxes and small boxes.
Yes, let's really break down how the encounters work. I think that would be fun.
Because I think it's fun to talk about with this game. And we don't usually go quite this mechanics heavy in a game, but I really like it in One Deck Dungeon. And I think I like the subtle reasons that the things are there as well. I like the way that just with a small tweak, it's like it just twists ever so slightly one way or the other. It feels different. And that's a really, really exciting design choice. It's really neat and it's really clever. So the way the boxes work is you either have small boxes or big boxes. And it's simply small boxes can only have 1 dice in them. And big boxes, you can put as many dice as you want in them. Big boxes are usually bigger numbers. So if there was a small box with the number 5 in it, you'd have to put a 5 or a 6 in it, right? Simple as that. If there was a big box with a number 10 in it, you could put 2 5s or a 6 and a 4 or 5 1s and a 5, however you want to do it. And obviously the boxes are all coloured to match a specific skill, which probably should have said that right up top of the episode, but hey, always player one being as efficient as ever. But yeah, so the reason I think this is really cool is that it means that when you look at your dice, you can immediately see different ways of doing things. Maybe I'll put the 5 in that small box there, and I'll put the 6 and the 4 in the big box. That would be great. Oh, but what about that 6 box over there, the small 6 box? That has to have a 6 in it, right? So maybe I need to get the lower numbers in the big box. And you see, it makes for a really interesting consideration of where to put the big dice, what to do with the little dice.
And then when you think you have it worked out, you realize that one of the boxes you're missing has a shield on it and needs to be filled in order for you to continue.
Yes.
And you have to plan everything all over again.
Yeah, and it's really fun that each enemy is kind of different and unique in that the way you look at their boxes is different. The way that their boxes are laid out is different. Those little changes mean you have to fight them in a very different way. You know, if their big box has a shield, well, then you can immediately throw your little dice at that. That's good value. And then you can save your big dice for later. But if the little box is, if there's loads of little boxes that are shields, then you're going to have to start looking for those numbers. And that's really cool because I don't know about you, Norm, but whenever I see the little boxes, I always try and match up the exact number for maximum value, right?
Of course, right? It's the Eurogamers in us.
It feels really wrong to put a 6 dice on a 5 box. Because, well, what if I needed that 6 for one extra point in a big box later? Yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
I like the way the game also confronts that feeling and makes you. The game has a 5 with a shield on it, and the only thing in that color that is a 5 or above is a 6, and you're sat there going, I don't want to do that.
This is the puzzly nature of the game, you know, in its essence, isn't it? And it's having that thing in the back of your mind as well of, well, I could always trade down this 3 and a 2 for a wild 2, and that also makes you lose that one value, doesn't it? You know, you're always kind of having to work out, oh, but I don't want to lose one value from my dice. I want them to be their full value.
And it's not just losing the value, it's losing the dice, because the dice could be used, if it's not a very good dice, just to activate a skill if you've got an appropriate skill. So it's kind of a double loss for an immediate win, but sometimes that immediate win is exactly what you need.
Yes, and sometimes those low value dice especially are just completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a bunch of small boxes and they're all 3 or 4 boxes and you've only rolled 2s, those 2s mean nothing to you.
Yeah, they're trash. You can just chuck them away.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really cool. So, but that brings us on to the other little mechanical tweak I wanted to bring up, which is traps versus combat encounters. So there are 2 types of encounters in the game: traps or combat. Combat is nasty beasties, and traps are traps. And the really cool thing about the way this works is combat is basically what we've been talking about here. Like, you look at all your different colored dice and you start trying to work them out. Do I want to sacrifice these 2 dice for a wild card to match this color? It's a real conversation. It feels like a to and fro almost. It feels like a battle. Whereas traps, the way they resolve is you pick one stat, and there'll be 2 options on every trap card. You pick one stat, and that's the only dice you roll, those and any heroic dice you'd roll. So, for example, if you're running across a rope bridge, you can either choose to run across it quickly or use magic and hover across it. So if you choose to run across it quickly, you'll be rolling your pink agility dice. If you hover across it, your blue mana dice. And there's usually a kind of push and pull with the 2 options. Usually it's one's a bit smaller number target, but you have to spend a bit of time. The other one's a bigger number target. But you're always going to just pick the one that you roll the most dice for, right?
Yes, because in addition to filling in the trap, the dungeon itself, depending on the floor you're in, will also have a requirement just for being in the room. This particular card that depicts the sort of prerequisites that need to be filled in for that floor for every encounter, there are 2 sides to it, one for traps and one for combat. And it's quite interesting that one that they are different at all. And one thing I found particularly is sometimes traps right at the beginning of the game are so difficult, especially if you don't have a dice if you don't have a stat that's good for that trap. There's no way you're going to be making a sacrifice if you encounter it. You're not going to be able to do all of it. And I kind of like going into it knowing I might just get lucky, but probably not.
Yeah, and you could always just flee from that encounter and then build towards it. But the thing I wanted to say about traps is that they are fast, and the decision space for them is a lot less because you're only rolling 1 color dice. So it feels thematically perfect. It feels like encountering a trap. You spring the trap, and the other thing is that the deviation is a lot swingier in the dice because you're rolling less dice. Instead of your big handful, you're rolling a third of that big handful. So you might roll garbage or you might roll great. Whereas if you're rolling your normal massive chunk of dice, it's a lot more likely that you'll roll some garbage and some great. And that's how a trap should be. You spring the trap and you either avoid it or you get stung by it, right?
I think they're a nice break almost.
Yes.
When I encounter a combat card,
You adopt your fighting stance, you get ready, you get in the zone.
because you think, right, how am I going to do this? You roll your dice and you think, what have I got to work with? When you're doing a trap, you're just rolling your dice and thinking, am I going to do it?
Be big, be big.
Yeah, you're thinking, Daddy needs a new pair of shoes. Come on.
I mean, you're thinking that with every single roll in this game, let's face it.
Yeah. But the difference is in the fights, you're thinking, oh, it's like a Mage Knight when you draw your hand of cards. You think, right, what have I got to work with? Let's puzzle it out.
Yeah, how can I make the best maximum value here? How can I cover the most boxes?
And whereas in a trap, you're like, am I going to do it or not?
Yeah, it's more binary, isn't it? In a fight, it's I've covered almost all the boxes, but is there a way to do all the boxes? In a trap, it's you did it or you didn't do it. You did all the boxes or you didn't do all the boxes at a glance.
You're going to take 3 wounds or not?
Yeah.
and that's it. And you know what? If you encounter 2 nasty traps right at the beginning and you weren't smart enough to run away, you could be looking at game over from right out the gate.
Yeah,
that happened to me in my second play. Actually, my second play, I encountered a trap and I ran away. And then I did a combat which let me take an item which bumped up my stat in that trap. And I thought, okay, here I go. With that 1 extra dice, I might get lucky. And I rolled. I didn't get lucky at all. I really, really didn't get lucky at all. And then a similar thing happened on the same floor, the first floor. I thought, well, how many times can I get unlucky, really? And then I was dead. That was it. Game over. GG.
Wow.
And I thought that was all my fault. I know that was my fault.
That's interesting because you don't get any ticks for that, do you? If you didn't do any...
No, I didn't get any ticks for that. But I didn't. But again, it's all about proportional rewards. How much time had I invested?
Yeah.
I think it was like 7 minutes.
So you didn't feel bad?
Between sort of 5 to 10 minutes. I sort of threw my head back and laughed. I was like, oh, well, that was silly of me.
And you've been, you got a story out of it. So it's great. It's great.
Yeah, and it was really fun. And if you kind of like games where you get to, I don't know if I'd call it push your luck, but maybe just test your luck in general. This is a game where that is an option. You can just run away from it. You don't have to play that game. But I quite enjoy that game, and it's quite fun for me.
And you did get to mark one little tick on your character sheet to say games played. At the bottom, it's got a box for games played. And you tick how many games you played, which is nice to see accrue, isn't it? It's nice to kind of look at that and go, "Cool, this character's done loads of fights, and how many bosses have they taken on?" And it's quite a cool little thing to look at.
Absolutely, but yeah, really, really, really like the change of pace with a trap.
Yeah,
sometimes they're just the worst thing. I have to avoid this at all costs. But sometimes they're a fun little moment where the randomness really gets to take center stage, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to let your brain kind of relax on the traps a little bit, isn't it? And just take a quick break and spring a trap. That'll just be over in a second. But the encounters as well, that can happen in sort of each of the encounters has 3 levels of difficulty. There's the little goblin guys that are worth 2 experience, the medium fellas who are worth 3, and the big scary spooky boys who are worth 4, right? And when you flip the card over and my eyes often immediately dart to the top right to see, am I facing a big bad or a little bad? That's kind of fun. It's kind of like you have a similar sort of engagement there of if you come across a 2-level enemy, you think, I should be able to deal with this, no consequences, right? But a 4-level enemy, I'm happy to take a wound or 2.
Yeah, or if it's right at the beginning of the game, you think I'll just leave them there. I'll come back to them later, maybe.
Yeah.
And when you do eventually get to loot those 4 XP enemies, they have some really neat abilities.
Yeah, I mean, the trade-off there is you might be taking a big hit from those 4 XP enemies, but they'll either give you a really powerful skill or the kind of the interesting granularity between the items you were talking about. They give you stats. You either just get a stat from level 2 or 3 enemies, the 2 or 3 experienced enemies, or if you're taking on a level 4 enemy, you'll get a stat and a HP. It's just an extra little perk for you.
It's nice.
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, Scruffy, the next thing I'd really like to unpack just because I'm curious, I've not played it, is I'd like to know the differences between One Deck Dungeon and One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows. You've played both.
Hmm.
How did you find Forest of Shadows? How does it compare? And what does it do differently? Did you like it? Did you hate it?
I love it. And I would say that from my memory of One Deck Dungeon and from sort of flicking through the cards when I had the game around mine, I would say that it does have maybe a little bit more nuance in some of the skills and abilities and cards and bosses, especially. I have every boss I've encountered, I've been really impressed by. Like we were saying before in the episode, it looks like they've got enraged times on most of the bosses, so that's a really cool additional feature. The main change between the games is poison. And poison is a very, very cool mechanic, I think. So in the base game, you just deal with the consequences are wounds that knock you out, or time that speeds the game up. In Forest of Shadows, you have an additional consequence, which is poison. And poison is either completely harmless or an absolute killer. It's fantastic. So the way it works is anytime you take a poison counter on your hero, then that just sits there. It doesn't do anything until the next time you explore. So instead of opening up a door, like I said in the description, you can explore, lay out some new cards. And you're in charge of when you do that. So that's cool. So when you explore, you just roll a dice, and if you roll higher than the number of your poison counters, you just remove a poison counter. It sort of dissipates over time, right? Whereas if you roll lower than your poison counters, then you remove a poison counter still, but you also take 2 wounds.
That's really neat.
How cool is that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
There's
neat.
additional little rules, like some of the rooms have a little the green leaf icon, and if those rooms are face up, then you increase +1 to your roll for every one of those rooms. So if you come across if you're really struggling and you've got a lot of poison counters, you might decide to explore, even though it's better value to explore when there are no rooms available because you're flipping over 4 cards, right? For the 2 time. You might decide to explore maybe even for just 1 new card because you've got 3 face up leaf rooms. So you're more likely to survive the poison for that turn. Kind of gives you some real choice there.
Yeah, that's neat because I always found that with One Deck Dungeon, the choice of when to explore was not really a choice.
Yes.
You just do it when you run out of rooms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless the last thing you're left with is just suicide.
Yeah.
You're always going to do it with one room still face up or no rooms at all,
Yeah.
because that's maximum value. Why wouldn't you do that? So I like that. That's some extra consideration there. Like you said, a little bit more nuance. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, the other change is that the potion. So you start the game with a basic potion in both games. The one in One Deck Dungeon, I think it's just you can heal 2 wounds at any time for a potion, or you can heal 3 wounds if you use the potion at the start of your turn. So that's, I think, a really nice design for that potion. And potions are rewarded for leveling up or anytime you gain a potion from an enemy loot. In Forest of Shadows, you are able to, every time you use another potion, so like I say, you can get potions as rewards. You also start the game with 1 basic potion of your choice. But anytime you use another potion or acquire a potion, you can just, as a freebie, heal either 1 wound or 1 poison token. And I almost always chose to heal a poison token because you'll pick them up, and if you've got them, they can be deadly. Like, you don't want to let them stack up. The only time I completely ignored them, I lost the game due to poison. So they're pretty vicious. But it's a fun little addition. It's a fun little rule. I miss the One Deck Dungeons basic potion, the one that you start with in that game, because I think it's a really cool choice and to have a big heal if you want it. But I wouldn't trade it for the poison. I love the poison in the game.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I have to play that, but I think I would like that as well, based on what you just told me. That sounds really really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad to hear it doesn't change too much fundamentally as well. That was one of my concerns when I started enjoying One Deck Dungeon, is that to make a new standalone game, it's messed. Why mess with a winning formula? I'm glad
Mm.
that it's still largely the same thing. I also hear you can mix the cards, but that would be a
Yeah.
bit awkward thematically, I think.
I'd love to try that personally. I would really love to try that. The other two things to mention are one, just a little quibble about it. The tokens were massive, and when I first opened them, I was like, "This is awesome! They're huge," but they don't fit on the cards very well. When you start stacking up some of the wound tokens on your hero, you're lifting up a tray of massive clunky tokens, where they seem the right size in one deck dungeon base. And we never mentioned components, but that just shows how much it was a bit of an issue for me. And the other thing to say that's different is the heroes are all different. You get a whole new roster of adventurers, and I really, really like them. I like them in the base game, but I actually also really like these ones. And I think I'd be hard pressed to say which ones are my favorite. They're certainly, especially the fairy in Forest of Shadows, they're certainly more swingy in Forest of Shadows, from what I can tell. Whereas in One Deck Dungeon, they seem a bit more, you could say, maybe more basic.
Can I have a little whine about the components?
Yeah, of course you can.
They're absolutely fine. They're absolutely fine. I actually think they're quite good, and I like the dice. They're fine. But the cards, the dungeon cards, they say put as many dice as you want on this box. We've given you room for 2.
three. You can easily fit 3 on a big box.
I can't. It's 2. There's room for 2. They're the same size as 2. You can start to stack them.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've knocked them over, and I can't
Yeah.
remember the value of the die. And I'm like, well, it must have been at least a 4. But if there were several, and it's like, oh, that's a pain.
Yeah.
That's a small gripe, and most of the time it didn't.
To be honest, I'd happily sacrifice that little inconvenience for the fact that it fits in such a neat little box.
Yes, yeah.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not really a complaint. It's just something that I noticed.
One thing I will say is the potions are white cubes, and I just hate that. Why aren't they little potions?
Yeah, that's true. One thing I will say, just going on about how much we like the characters, I really liked all the heroes as well. And what's quite cool about this game, and quite unique, and shouldn't be unique or cool, it should be standard, is that they're all female. They're all female characters, and they're all dressed appropriately for adventurers.
They're wearing actual armor and adventuring gear, aren't they? They're all female presenting and wearing clothes.
How disappointing is it that, as an industry, that is something worthy of note? That shouldn't be worthy of note. That should just be normal. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not normal. It is worthy of note. And yeah, kudos to One Deck Dungeon on some really, really awesome characters.
Yes, yeah, couldn't agree more.
Can I just say I really, really enjoy? I don't play video games, but I kind of enjoy the tropes that this game leans on. I said right at the beginning, I wish I encountered this game earlier, because when I was transitioning from video games to board games, this is exactly the kind of experience I was looking for.
Yeah.
I was looking for that game where I had agency and control, but it was full of excitement, and I would go in, kick down the door, beat up the bad guy, level up, fight the big bad, and win in glorious battle or die a hero. And this game does exactly that. And for everything that we said so far in this analysis, I think the most important thing for me is that it accesses that part of my brain which thinks, yeah, I've been wanting to play a game like this forever.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And dungeon games are done to death. Campaign games are done to death. This game has dungeon element. It has a sort of campaigny feel with the score sheet. And it feels fresh. Even though it's tropey. I like the fact that it's tropey. It still feels fresh. Why is that, Scruffy? Why am I ranting here?
No, I agree, and I think part of it is the design. I mean, my initial thought when I saw the game and I sort of thumbed through the cards, I haven't peeked all the bosses just yet, because there's still a few, especially the hard ones, I haven't got around to fighting. But I like the surprise of that. And my first worry was that there weren't enough. There's one 1-star boss, 3 2-star bosses and 2 3-star bosses, I think, in both boxes. That's 5 bosses. It feels like there should be double that because I guess maybe I'm spoiled and I'm used to more. But that being said, I have found because you often have to repeat bosses and you want to try out the different characters in the game, which often means starting from the first one over again. That's pretty cool. Personally, I would say I'd like to just see more 1-star bosses because then you can start a new character and be excited to uncover and meet a new boss, even though it's the easy boss. That would be cool. But I get that you want more replayability for the 2 or 3-star bosses because they're what you'll be grinding to beat. They'll be the ones that you keep having to repeat because the 1-star boss, you could theoretically do it, and I have, with a 0 level hero. So then why would you go back to the 1-star unless you're grinding? So yeah, I can see the design there. I'd like to see more bosses, but the fact that there are multiple heroes, I think it adds so much to the replayability that I can't see myself getting bored for a good little while. Do you know what it needs? It needs Marvel Heroes expansion packs just to give you a few extra bosses. Just like one card expansion pack.
Well, Scruffy, you say that. There is actually an expansion out already, which just adds new heroes and new bosses as well.
Oh yes, I think I remember seeing this. This is probably where I got it from. It's the Abyssal Depths, isn't it?
That's the one. That is the one. Now, on top of that, you can tell it's quite a well supported game because I believe there is indeed another expansion coming out that we obviously haven't played because it's not out. And on top of that, on their website, if you click on onedeckdungeon.com and go to extras, you can also listen to a free soundtrack whilst you're playing the game.
No
That's that's
way.
just neat, isn't it? That's just neat.
That's so cool. And I'm very excited to get my hands on. I will definitely be picking up myself a copy of the Abyssal Depths. It just adds like the thing I was saying, it just adds a few new baddies and a few new heroes. That's just what you want for this sort of game, just a bit more content. But having said that, I'm still not bored with the content I've got in the box at the moment. I'm still fighting my way through the roster of baddies and I'm having a blast.
I mean, my concern wasn't with the bosses. My
Mm.
concern, well, the clues in the name, one deck dungeon. My concern was in that it's going to be the same dungeon every time.
Hmm.
But of course it isn't,
No.
because even when you get to the end of your first game, you realize there are a lot of cards that you haven't even seen. Because the way the mechanics work is that you discard cards from the top to pass time, like Scruffy's already alluded to. That means that it's very likely that you will never. There's a bunch of cards. Whatever's left after the third dungeon, you have not ever once encountered them. I think that's great.
Yeah, and once you do encounter them, or once you've played a lot and you start seeing familiar faces, or you've seen the whole deck over and over again, I feel like it's nice. It's like they're kind of familiar friends, and it feels like you as a player have leveled up too, just like your hero has. You're encountering stuff that you're used to. It's all it's old hat. It's a goblin. I've seen loads of goblins before. I can take this on easy. But then when you get to the boss, it's still new and exciting and fresh. That's why I think the bosses were where I jumped to for the novelty.
And adds a slight bit of agency where now that you know exactly how difficult they are, now that you've actually tried them, you know when to take them on and when to leave them a little bit more. And I think that's quite fun as well. But yeah, my concern before playing was that the fact there was only one deck for dungeon cards, and I know that shouldn't have concerned me because it's literally in the name.
I mean, this is one thing where the mixing the two decks as well would be so much more replayability for that, right? Like if you had both games and you could mix both the decks, you're going to see different faces every time. Yeah, that would be really fun.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys can tell, me and Norm both really, really like this game.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm being so passionate about it is because it surprised me. I didn't expect there to be this much meat on the bone.
Mm.
Didn't expect there to be this much fun. It's fun to manipulate dice. It's fun to roll dice. It's fun to sort of place them. It feels like a dungeon game, but also kind of feels like a bit of a thinky dice placement game. You know, got like Under Falling Skies vibes, but I like this more.
Yes, I totally get where you're coming from with that. And it never really feels like it's taking itself too seriously, which I really like. You know, it never feels like it's trying to be more than what it is. It's just nice to see well thought out game design. It's nice to see these little intricacies come together, little tweaks and design choices here and there that just make you go, oh, that's clever.
Like I said at the beginning, this game knows what parts are fun and it lets you engage with them constantly.
Hmm.
That's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think the only sort of main drawback, I think, or criticism I would say is that it can be a bit fiddly and finicky at the start. There were a few moments while I was learning, I had to check out a few rules and things that weren't totally clear. Some of the wording on the cards were a little bit cumbersome.
We've both said to each other that we've both made this game harder than it needs to be before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way the potion's printed in the base game, I didn't realize it was an addition to heal a wound. I thought you had to spend a potion to do that, for example, or a poison. And the fact that it says you may heal a wound or a poison when you could just say heal, because anytime you heal in the game, the rulebook says you can remove a poison. What, you know, that it's that sort of nitty gritty stuff that it could. And it feels like a shame because it feels so well thought out in terms of the actual core mechanics. So if they just got that extra little mile and got their wording good, that would have been good.
I think it only takes, one full play, maybe two full plays. And you're talking about 50 minutes, just under an hour of gameplay there, aren't you, to work that stuff out. So I think it's pretty forgivable.
Yep. And you can ask me about how to get your wording good, and I'll help you with your good wording. Yes, for sure. You're right. And it didn't take very long to get past all that, get into a rhythm, get into a routine, put the rulebook back in the box and never look at it again. You know, it's got player references as well, which is always good. And I think at this point, we're just rambling. So let's move on, no?
Let's do that. So we'll move on to the listener questions portion of the show.
Yeah.
At this part, we throw out a question to the listeners and we look at the responses from the last episode. So the question we asked, and this was back in episode 30, was what game have you put off playing forever? How was it when you finally got around to playing, or is it still unplayed? What responses did we get?
So one of our responses was from Tigmic, who says, for me, it was a feast for Odin. On paper, it was the perfect game for me when it came out. I had played so much Agricola and somehow thought it was just Agricola with some polyominoes. This podcast and BGG recommendations pushed me over the edge. You're very welcome, Tigmic. It's now one of my most played games. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah, first of all, that is really heartwarming, isn't it?
Yeah, that's so cool to hear. Because Feast for Odin was one of our first games. It was the first game,
First game
ever game we talked about for our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. A Feast for Odin episode is, as I affectionately call it, our embarrassing baby photo episode.
Do not check it out.
But it's glad to hear that somebody got some value out of it and has not discovered, they obviously already knew about Feast for Odin, but has now built up the courage to learn and play it. Because I think courage is the right word, because when I got Feast for Odin, I looked at all the cardboard that came with it and thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to play this? And it was actually yourself and another member of our game group. When I took it out the box, you guys were like, we'll help you punch it and organize it. And that really helped. Now that it was organized, I was like, okay, yeah, I can learn this. That's not a problem.
It's got a terrible rule book as well, so at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't remember how much difficulty I had with the rulebook. I think I watched a lot of playthroughs for it. But
it might have been that at the time I was learning, I was still relatively new to the hobby, and so I was very impatient with it. Hey ho, it was a fantastic game and one of the best solo, for sure.
Well, I'm glad that's a story with a happy ending. I've got my own answer to this question, which I'll come to in a moment. The next response we had was from Stop Somewhere Eric, who said, poor Lost Ruins of Arnak. No table large enough, and just not enough motivation to set it up, even if I love the theme, when I could, instead, pull out another solo worker placement I already like Viticulture. What do you make of that, Scruffy?
Oh, get it to the table. It's such a good game. I've only played it digitally on Tabletop Simulator, and that makes setting up a lot easier if that tempts you away from. I don't know how we could not play with the physical copy, though, because that game looks gorgeous. Yeah, it's really worth it. Lost Ruins, really, really wonderful game. Episode 27, we spoke about it with Brandon Waite, and that was, yeah, it was a really fun game for us to experience. If you want some more high octave enthusiasm from me and Norm and Brandon, then check that out because it's a really great game.
Yeah, it's a great game, and I much prefer it to Viticulture, so it is worth the investment.
Next up, we have Rumpel Frumpkins, who says, got basic fantasy to try doing some old school solo with. Looked over it and then realized I don't really want to play D&D style games anyway.
And that's really funny. I don't know if I've ever had that where I bought a game and then realized, why was I thinking I don't ever want to try this? Actually, that's...
What? Are you kidding? You have that all the time, right?
Yeah, as I was saying that, I was like, wait, I can name several.
Oh my god. I think you enjoy getting hold of copies of games more than you enjoy playing them.
That's not true. I've slowed down a lot. And I can stop at any time.
Basic Fantasy is one we haven't even looked at covering for the show, isn't it? I think I've heard it mentioned a few times from a few different YouTubers, but it's never really gripped me. Have you heard much about it?
I've heard what Rumpel Frumpkins has said about it.
Well, just then.
Just then. And it's not really pulling me towards it, if I'm honest.
Okay, well, we'll have to keep an eye on it, maybe check it out for one of our future planning phases.
Okay, and we got a response from Octavo, previous guest of the show, Octavo, Dan, who says, for me, it's Savage Planet, the fate of Phantos. Backed on Kickstarter, really nice art, gameplay seems solid, but it's just never made it to the table. Maybe one day. I've not heard of this one. I nearly said the fate of Fantas, and that's a very different game about soft drinks.
Yeah, it's not one that hasn't crossed my radar either, really, and not one we'd be able to do for the show because it is 3 to 6 players. Dan's right. It looks very nice art, very kind of old school fantasy sort of, I don't know, heavy metal style. You know, it's very nice. I like the look a lot of the game. So maybe once this whole COVID thing's out of the way, Dan, we can get it to the table. Next up, we have Frogstar, who says, the game that has been sitting there unplayed for the longest is Great Western Trail. I think I'm slightly put off by my wife's lukewarm reaction to Maracaibo.
Well, a couple of things here.
Okay.
I have no interest in playing Maracaibo, and I love Great Western Trail, so don't let that put you off. And secondly, try the solo mode if your wife isn't interested in playing. The solo mode was designed by Steve Schlepphurst, who we had on episode 13 when we discussed Atoma deck specifically. And the Atoma deck, it's a fan-made Atoma deck, it's called Garth. It's freely available on BGG, and it's really very good. So if the only thing putting you off is that you're worried your wife won't like it, try it solo, because it's a very simple and fun Atoma deck that's made by a very nice person.
Yeah, and it's a great game, and it's very good multiplayer as well. We've talked about it a few times. Give it a go. It's great fun. And I'm saying give it a go. You guys know you got these games because you think they look cool. I mean, you already know to give them a go. It's part of the thing, though, isn't it? That sometimes the games just get locked on the shelf, don't they? And it becomes a habit to not play them, I think.
Yeah, and this is why we asked the question, because we have this exact same problem. I'd be interested to hear if you have any games like this, Scruffy, because you're quite good at learning new games, whereas I kind of procrastinate. So I want to sort of unpack that in a moment, but we have more responses to get through. The next one was from the person who funded this episode, Banana Republic.
Yeah, an unofficial sponsor, Banana Republic, who says, Cuba Libre has been sitting unplayed for a very long time. I'm hoping to get it up soon to learn, but with Navajo Wars taking me straight up 9 to 10 hours to learn, or sort of learn, I'm going to be playing that one first a few times before stepping into Cuba Libre. Ooh.
Well, I kind of feel bad because a long time ago we said, Banana, we'd love to try Cuba Libre with you. Let's arrange a day on Tabletop Sim, and just never happened. I think a
Yeah.
part of that is because at the time we thought we'd be covering coin games a lot sooner than what we will probably end up doing. It is only a matter of time until we play something like Cuba Libre, I feel,
Yeah, for
though.
sure.
I even think some of the newer coin games have a different solo system, apparently, without bots. So that's quite interesting to me as well.
Ooh.
So there's definitely some depth to this coin game rabbit hole in terms of what us as soloists can explore. But yeah, I feel you there, Banana. There's a lot to learn. You know, if you have to play all the bots just to play solo, that's difficult. If you have to play all four factions to play solo because you don't want to learn the bots, that's still difficult. So I do feel you for you there. I think Banana's also played Coin Tribes Revolt following our episode, which was going to be my recommendation. But yeah, I think they've already done that one.
Just scrolling down here, Norm, we seem to have a lot of responses because we left it 2 extra weeks for this one. So I'm going to suggest we do maybe one more this episode and then next episode finish them off, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, that's
So we'll
great.
keep this question open another week maybe, and we'll finish them all off next episode and ask a new question next episode. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Let's do Slusher's response. It's the next one that we received.
Okay.
Slusher said, High Frontier 4 is the game on my shelf that I haven't learnt yet. 8 months old and counting. It's infamously complex, has a fairly convoluted rulebook, and is physically sprawling. Solo mode has also been substantially overhauled in the living rules, which I can currently only access from the small screen of my phone. Finally, our house is being renovated. I just don't have somewhere to leave a game set up for a day or two to learn it bit by bit. It also took me a long time to get the related games Biogenesis and Bio Megafauna 2 and Bios Origins to the table. Those all turned out to be much easier than they looked once you got past the rulebooks and started playing, especially with some fan made resources from Board Game Geek. Hopefully, High Frontier 4 ends up being the same. That's often the case, isn't it, Scruffy?
Hmm.
You put off a game for ages, and when you finally get to playing, I mean, what I often have to remind myself is it can't be that hard, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, why would it be published?
Yeah.
It can't be that difficult because it is a game.
Yeah. Yeah, if you've looked at the pictures to High Frontier 4, though, I don't know if you know the game very well, Norm, but I've just had a quick look on Board Game Geek here. Oh my god, it looks complicated. It looks like actual scientific schematics and maps, and wow, it looks intense. Which isn't to say it's difficult. Like I remember being just blown away by how easy games like Twilight Imperium, which have a real reputation, were when I actually sat down and started learning the rules or watching videos and learning the rules as I did for that one. You know, they're meant to be played, they're meant to be accessible and learnable, and sometimes poor design choices can cause problems, but we're all smart people. We can figure it out, and it's worth it. It's worth that investment of effort. Do you want to just quickly talk about some games you've got hanging out on your shelf here, Noel?
Sure, there's a few that have been unplayed for a while, but the one that is the most infamous that I've said to you and all our listeners on our Discord know how much I struggle with this one is Fields of Fire 2. Fields of Fire is just dense to get through. The rulebook is just over 60 pages for a board game. I think that's quite a lot. And it's all entangled with military jargon. So it takes me a while to get through 2 or 3 pages. And then I'll put it down for a while and I'll come back to it and I'll go, I can't remember what I learnt last time. And I'll have to start again. And I've been in a cycle of doing this with Fields of Fire since I purchased it last year at
Yeah.
the start of lockdown. I thought it was going to be my lockdown dream. I was looking for a game with tactical combat, crunchy decisions, campaign style, works best solo, and it is only a solitaire game. And when I come across Fields of Fire, I was like, this is the answer to all my prayers. And then I looked at the rulebook and I thought, no, it is not. I mean, one day I will play it. Maybe it would be the best game I've ever played. Maybe it would be really devastatingly mediocre, but there's only one way to find out. I'm going to have to buck up my ideas and finally get around to learning it. But yeah, I really don't know how I'm gonna get through it.
Wicked. That's so cool. I'm really enjoying this listener question. I think it's really awesome that we're going to carry it on to next episode and get around to all those responses, because it's really fun hearing about games that other people are struggling to play, especially if you've played them, because you're like, oh, you should. It's a really exciting feeling, isn't it? So yeah, we'll carry this over to next episode. Feel free to add any more to the list. If there's any more that have come up this month for you, throw them on there, and we'll try and get around to all the rest of them by the end of next episode.
Any games you've procrastinated on, Scruffy?
For me, no, I'm very good at playing all my games. The only ones I have real trouble with are learning new RP systems. I find really hard. Took me. Oh, I've got Mice and Mystics on my side that is completely unplayed, but that's more because I looked at the rulebook, I looked at the game, and went, I'm not sure this is for me. I actually won it in a raffle. And so it's going to end up probably going back to a raffle. Unless any of you guys want to convince me that Mice and Mystics is worth the time, it doesn't seem like it is. It seems a bit naff to me, but I could be wrong.
Brilliant. Well, that's all.
Oh, there is one other game that I really want to play, but nobody else wants to play, and I can't see anyone's ever wanting to play with me. So this is a game that is ranked 4004 on Board Game Geek. It's a game from 1987. So pretty contemporary, pretty modern game. It's not a solo game, but I can't find friends to play this game with me because it's old, and I think it might even be Fantasy Flight. I can't remember, but it's a medieval war style game called Blood Royale, where you take on a kingdom, and it looks just so silly and complicated, and you're playing a ruler, getting married, causing wars and treaties, and it looks unbalanced and naff. But I want to play it because I'm a nerd, and it's my sort of thing.
I'll give it a go.
It's on my board game shelf, and I'm never taking it off. And one day I'll find someone. Would you really?
I'll play it.
I don't believe you. I wouldn't. Part of it is I wouldn't feel comfortable inflicting it on anyone. It's like the sort of game that doesn't have good time management. It's the sort of thing that would last a weekend.
We'll see. But I'd be more than happy to give it a go.
Yeah.
If it's terrible, we can always stop. We don't have to keep playing.
Okay, now we just need to convince one more person.
That's going to be tricky.
All right, well, that's it from us then, guys. Thank you so much for listening today. Feel free to get your comments in. Where can they reach us, Norm?
So you can reach us in multiple ways. You can join our Discord. Our Discord is absolutely free, and the links are in the description. And it's a really, really great community of welcoming, nice people.
Yes.
You can also email us. We're alwaysplayer1podcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can reach out on Facebook or Instagram. The links to our Facebook are in the description, and we're at alwaysplayer1podcast on Instagram. We're also on Reddit. We hang out in a few communities, actually, but we always post our episodes on the solo board gaming subreddit. It's always_player_1. If you'd like to support the show, we'd greatly appreciate that. We really, really appreciate all of our patrons, and you can join them by clicking the link in the description. It's patreon.com/alwaysplayer1podcast. The money always goes on the show. It has recently got us Forbidden Lands, which is going to be coming up maybe soon, maybe not. It got us Seventh Continent, which got a really fun episode with Dan as the guest. And the more of you that join, the more awesome the podcast can be.
And what does it get them?
So in return, you get access to our mini-series, The Planning Phase. The Planning Phase is released every other Friday, so if you are a patron, you get to hear us once a week instead of once every 2 weeks. And in the Planning Phase, we decide on air what we're going to be covering in the next episodes. So we always give a little recap of what's coming up. We discuss how we thought the last episode went, how we thought the last live stream went, for example. And then we move into what's coming up next and share our ideas. We then decide on what's coming up and then just have a good old natter.
Yeah, there's often some hot takes that come up in those as well. We had an interesting chat about Twilight Imperium last planning phase, so do check it out.
I shared my thoughts on Seventh Continent because I wasn't in that episode in the planning phase, so they're like little mini episodes, and they're available to patrons only. So it's definitely worth having a look if you haven't already. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can buy us a cup of coffee. It's coffee, which is ko-fi.com/alwaysplay1. Link to that is also in the description. And yeah, we really appreciate you listening to us. You support us enough already, so no pressure. And we really appreciate your listenership. We really appreciate all the nice things you say about us online. And yeah, look forward to 2 weeks' time when we'll get to speak to you again.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And thank you, Banana. You're awesome. We love the game and we love you for getting it for us. Thank you so much, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it. Peace out. We'll catch you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.